Today I'm going to demonstrate and explain two different methods that we can use to count a set of objects. Specifically today I'm going to show us how we can count a set of 40 objects, but you can use these methods to count any number of objects that you may have. So what is counting? Counting means to give a name to each item in a group so that you can find the total amount of items that you have. Some people might not think that the ability to count is important, but counting is so extremely important because everything in life stems from our basic knowledge of math and counting. If you're at a grocery store and someone calls and asks you to pick up 2 lemons, how do you know how many 2 is? Or if you're at the store looking for 2 shirts, how do you know how many 2 shirts is? So, those are just two different things to point out, but I mean, really, counting is in everything. Counting is used daily, whether you notice it or not. So, on to the techniques. The two different techniques that I'm going to be discussing today are counting by ones and skip counting. So, we're going to start with the counting by ones technique in counting objects. Counting by ones is a technique where you use a one-to-one correspondence to count the objects you have. So here in front of me I have a paper with 40 paper clips. So by using our counting by ones counting technique, what we're going to do is start at the left side of our paper and go to the right. We have a bunch of little objects on this paper, but instead of saying 1, 7, 5, we're going to start at the top left hand side, and for every object we give one number to it, which is the one-to-one correspondence. For every object you give one number to it. So, starting left and moving right, we give each object one number, and every time the number gets one bigger. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, now to the next line, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, on to the next line, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, on to the next line, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, next line, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, next line, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, next line, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, next line, 36, 37, 38, 39, and the last one is 40. So, the last object we counted was 40. So, because the last number we say for our last object, we know that that's the total amount for all of our objects. So we said 40 for this last object because we started at the top and worked our way down each row. So we know that we counted 40 paper clips on this paper using the counting by ones counting technique, which consisted of the one-to-one correspondence, where we gave one count for every object we touched. Now, pointing with your finger helps you to stay on track, because if you count in your head, which you can do, it can kind of get confusing sometimes. So when I count by ones, I like to use my finger so I can touch it and make sure that I've counted this one and this one. In every row we come down, we start at the left again so we don't confuse ourselves and forget where we were. So every time we count, back to the left, and then we count giving one number for every paper clip, getting bigger each time. Alright, so that was the counting by ones technique. The next counting technique that we are going to discuss is skip counting. Skip counting is a grouping method of counting. Unlike in the counting by ones where each object got one count, in skip counting we group. Here we can see we have rows of the equal amount of objects, and instead of counting one by one by one, we can see that every row has 5 objects. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we can see for the rest of the rows, they all have 5 objects in them. So, for skip counting, we're not going to count each and every object. We're going to count by rows. So we know that the first row has 5, the second row has 5, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth. We know that all 8 rows have 5 objects. So, now we're going to count adding 5 every time. Instead of adding one number every time, we're going to add 5 every time. So, starting at the left side, we're going to work our way down. And since we're not counting each individual object, we don't need to move our finger over every object. Instead, since we're counting by rows, we will just move our finger down the side of the paper to point out each row of 5 that we're counting. So let's begin. The first row has 5 objects. The second row has 5, so that is 10. 5 more, 15. 5 more, 20. 5 more, 25. 5 more, 30. 5 more, 35. And our last row, adding 5 more, gives us 40. So there we just skip counted. We counted all of the objects we had based on the 5 objects we know is in each row. So instead of counting one by one by one, like in the counting by ones technique, the skip counting, we used grouping by rows to count our 8 groups of 5, which we see here. We added 5 every time, and skip counted. We counted 5, then counted 5 more, 5 more, 5 more, 5 more, 5 more, 5 more, and our last 5 to give us 40. Now notice, whether we counted by ones or whether we skip counted, both ways we ended up with the same amount of objects, which was 40. And like I said, you can use these counting techniques and many others to count all sorts of number of objects that you may have that you're wanting to count or needing to count. But these two were just some that we were going to work on today. They were the focus of the day. So do you remember what the 2 counting techniques that we worked on today? The first one was counting by ones, using a 1-to-1 correspondence, giving one number to each object, getting bigger every time. And the second method that we used was skip counting, where we didn't count one by one, but we used the grouping to give us 5, 5, 5, 5, which makes counting faster and easier for some, but either way, you get the same answer, and whatever works best for you is what you should use. Hopefully you learned a little something from this video in counting techniques for objects 30 through 50.